Emma and Daniel had been married for almost 12 years when they moved to a quiet street in Portland, Oregon. Their new house wasn't big, but it had a porch with white railings and a small garden Emma loved to tend. Daniel worked long hours as an architect, and Emma, who taught art at a local community center, spent her afternoons painting by the big kitchen window. Life was steady, comfortable, but underneath that calm, something between them had started to fade. They still cared for each other deeply, but the spark that once made them inseparable had dimmed without either of them noticing when it was during their first week in the neighborhood that they met Mark and Claire. The couple lived next door, about the same age, with easy smiles and a kindness that felt rare. Mark ran a local coffee shop and Claire was a photographer. On their very first evening together, they brought over a bottle of wine as a welcome gift and ended up staying for hours. Conversation flowed easily. Mark had the kind of humor that filled a room, while Claire had a gentle, observant way of speaking that made people feel understood. Over the following weeks, the two couples became inseparable. They shared dinners, weekend barbecues, and even grocery runs. Emma admired how natural Mark and Claire seemed together. They finished each other's sentences and laughed often, as if they'd found a rhythm that hadn't been lost to time. Watching them reminded Emma of her early days with Daniel, when everything felt effortless. She didn't say that out loud, but she knew Daniel felt it too. One Friday evening in late summer, Mark invited them over for dinner. The air smelled of rain, and the porch lights from both houses glowed softly through the mist. They ate outside under the covered patio while the sound of distant thunder rolled through the hills. Claire had cooked lemon chicken, and Mark opened a few bottles of wine. The night carried a kind of magic calm, intimate, and just different enough to make everyone forget about the rest of the world as the evening went on. The conversation shifted from small talk to deeper subject streams. Regrets, the things couples don't often share in public. Daniel talked about how busy work had become, how he sometimes missed the simple days when he and Emma would drive to the coast just to watch the waves. Emma listened quietly, holding her glass, realizing how long it had been since they'd talked about anything real. Claire smiled softly. "You two still have that connection," she said, her voice gentle but sure. "You can see it when you look at each other." Emma laughed nervously. "Oh, I don't know about that. We mostly just look tired." Mark shook his head. "No, she's right. It's rare. Some people spend their whole lives wanting that kind of bond." The comment made Emma's chest tighten. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She met Daniel's eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, part surprise, part confusion, part memory. The rain outside had turned into a steady rhythm, tapping softly against the patio roof. The world felt smaller, quieter. Claire leaned back in her chair, studying them with that same thoughtful expression. "It's just nice to see," she said softly. "People who still look at each other with something real. You don't see it much anymore." Her words lingered. No one said anything for a moment, and even the rain seemed to hush. Emma felt her cheeks warm, unsure why the simple compliment had affected her so deeply. Maybe because it had been a long time since someone noticed her that way. Or since she'd noticed Daniel that way. Mark stood to refill everyone's glasses. "We always talk about how love changes over time," he said, smiling faintly. "But sometimes when we see a couple like you two, it reminds us why we fell in love in the first place." Emma smiled politely, but her heart raced. There was something about the way Mark said it, calm, honest, and just slightly personal. She didn't know what to make of it, but she couldn't deny that it stirred something in her. Claire reached across the table and touched Emma's hand briefly. It wasn't strange, not exactly. But it carried warmth that surprised her. The air had changed in a way no one could quite describe. What started as friendly conversation had turned into something deeper, like they were all standing at the edge of a quiet secret no one had spoken yet. After dinner, they moved to the porch. Mark brought out a speaker, and soft jazz filled the background. The four of them sat watching the rain slide down the streetlights, talking about little things, music, favorite travel memories, how the city seemed calmer after a storm. Daniel and Emma sat close together, his arm around her shoulders, something he hadn't done in a long time. It felt natural, almost like muscle memory. Claire watched them with a faint smile. "You two have such an energy," she said again, her tone softer now. "It's beautiful to watch." Daniel looked slightly embarrassed. "We're just trying to survive the week," he joked, but his laugh came out awkward. Claire's gaze didn't waver. "No, really. The way you talk to each other. It feels real. It's not about being perfect. It's about being seen." Emma felt the words sink in. Being seen. That was exactly what she'd been missing, the sense that someone really looked at her, understood her beyond the routine of daily life. She had forgotten how it felt to be noticed that way, even by her own husband. The rain grew heavier, blurring the lights outside into golden halos. For a while, none of them spoke. Mark leaned forward slightly and said, almost in a whisper, "You know, sometimes we forget how beautiful love looks from the outside. Watching it reminds us that it's still possible." The sentence floated in the quiet air between them. Emma didn't know what to say, and Daniel looked at her with a strange mixture of wonder and unease. There was nothing inappropriate in Mark's tone, yet it carried an intensity that made the moment feel strangely fragile. Claire reached for her cup and smiled faintly. "It's like art," she said. "When you see it, you feel something hope, maybe?" That made Emma laugh softly. "I'm not sure our marriage is art." "Maybe it is," Claire said simply. The night went on like that, gentle, thoughtful, but with an undercurrent of emotion, none of them fully named. When the rain finally stopped, the street shimmered under the lamplight, and the air smelled like wet cedar. Emma and Daniel stood to leave, thanking them for the meal. Claire hugged Emma tightly, and Mark shook Daniel's hand in a quiet, steady way that said more than words, as they walked home under the dripping trees. Emma couldn't stop thinking about what Claire had said. "It's beautiful to watch." What had she meant by that? It had sounded innocent, but something in her tone made Emma wonder if there was more beneath it, something thoughtful, maybe even wistful. Daniel walked beside her silently, hands in his pockets, the sound of their steps echoing softly on the wet pavement. When they reached their porch, he looked at her and said, "There. Interesting, aren't they?" Emma nodded. "Yeah, different." He smiled a little. "In a good way." She hesitated, then returned the smile. "Maybe? I think so." Inside, the house felt warmer than usual. Emma went to the window and looked back at the faint light glowing through Mark and Claire's curtains. She could just make out their silhouettes, still sitting together, talking quietly. That image stayed with her, their calm, their closeness, and the way they had looked at her and Daniel that night. It wasn't judgmental or curious. It was something else, something that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know it yet. But that single evening, the laughter, the quiet looks, and the strange sense of being watched was the start of something that would change everything for all four of them. It wasn't love at first sight or anything dramatic. It was subtler than that, a quiet recognition, a shared loneliness, and a spark of curiosity about what love could still mean when you let others see it for what it really was. And as the rain began again, tapping softly against the window, Emma felt a mix of peace and uncertainty. She didn't know where this new connection would lead, but one thing was clear. Something had begun that night, something that none of them could ever quite put into words. The following weekend arrived with the kind of warmth that makes people restless. The rain had passed and Portland's streets gleamed under soft sunlight. Emma and Daniel spent the morning doing chores, washing dishes, folding laundry, pretending everything was as usual. But beneath the quiet rhythm of their day, something felt different. Ever since that dinner with Mark and Claire, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible had shifted between all of them. She caught herself thinking about the way Claire had looked at her, and Daniel gentle, curious, almost emotional, and the way Mark had spoken that night, calm but full of meaning. It hadn't been inappropriate, yet there had been an intensity in his words, the kind that lingers in your thoughts when everything else fades. That Saturday evening, Mark texted Daniel inviting them for another dinner. Nothing fancy, the message read. Just good food and good company. Daniel showed Emma the text, and she hesitated for a moment before nodding. Sure, she said. It'll be nice. But her voice held a small uncertainty even she didn't understand. When they arrived at Mark and Claire's house, the atmosphere was softer than before. Candles glowed in the living room, and mellow music played quietly in the background. The table was set neatly, and the lights were dim, giving everything a calm, almost cinematic warmth. Claire greeted them with her usual kindness, wearing a soft cream sweater and her hair tied loosely back. Mark smiled, easy and warm as always, though his eyes held a depth that Emma hadn't noticed before. Dinner began with laughter and easy talk. They spoke about work, neighbors, and little things that didn't matter much. But as the evening went on, the conversation again began to slip into more personal places. It wasn't planned, just happened. Like the words had been waiting for the right silence to escape. Mark leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. You ever think about how people change when they stop being seen? He asked quietly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Mark shrugged lightly. I mean, when life gets busy and you stop noticing each other, you're still there, still loving each other, but it's like you forget how to really look. The room fell quiet. Claire nodded slightly. That's the hardest part of love, she said. Not losing someone, but losing how you used to see them. Emma felt her throat tighten. She looked down at her glass, not sure what to say. Daniel reached across the table, brushing her hand with his fingers. That simple touch, small, wordless, made her heart ache. Mark noticed the gesture and smiled faintly. You two remind us of that. The way you still connect, it's rare. Emma tried to deflect the attention, but Claire spoke again, softly. Would you mind if I said something honest? Daniel nodded cautiously. Sure. Claire looked between them. When we watched you that night talking, laughing, it reminded us of ourselves years ago. It was moving. You probably didn't notice, but the way you look at each other, it's beautiful. The word watched made Emma's pulse quicken, though Claire's tone was gentle, almost reverent. She wasn't talking about watching in a strange or uncomfortable way. It was more like she had witnessed something tender and real. Mark added, it's hard to explain. Sometimes when you see love right in front of you, it makes you remember what you've lost. His honesty hung in the air. No one moved for a long moment. The candlelight flickered, painting soft shadows across the room. Emma looked at Daniel again. He looked as uncertain as she felt, half flattered, half unsettled. Claire reached for her wine, her expression sincere. You to make people believe again, she said. We just wanted to tell you that. There was no flirting in her tone, no teasing, only truth. Still, the way she said it made Emma's heart race. It wasn't just about admiration. It was about connection, the kind that made people drop their walls. Mark stood and walked toward the window, staring out at the quiet street. Sometimes, he said softly, we forget that love is something to be seen, not hidden. People need to witness it to remember what it looks like. Daniel smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. I guess we don't really think about people watching, he said. Mark turned, meeting his eyes. Maybe you should. Sometimes letting others see how love really lives. That's how it stays alive. The words felt heavy, meaningful. Emma couldn't tell whether he was talking about them or about his own marriage. She sensed there was a sadness in his voice, like he was carrying memories he didn't often share. Claire leaned forward. You two should never lose that, she said gently. The way you talk, the way you listen, it's something worth keeping. It reminds people like us that love isn't gone. It's just quieter. Her eyes shimmered, and Emma realized that beneath her calmness, Claire was speaking from pain. Maybe she and Mark had been through their own distance, their own silent years. Mark walked back to the table, his tone softer now. Would you mind if we asked you something a bit strange? Emma and Daniel exchanged a quick glance. Go ahead, Daniel said carefully. Mark looked at them both, then spoke slowly. Would you mind if we just watched you two tonight? Just being yourselves. Talking, laughing, the way you naturally are together. It's not meant to be strange. It's just honest. The room fell completely still. The only sound was the soft ticking of the wall clock. Emma blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Claire spoke next, her voice calm and clear. You don't have to say yes. It's just that the way you two connect is comforting to us. It reminds us what we've been missing. For a moment, no one breathed. The request sounded unusual, but there was no discomfort in the tone or hint of anything beyond admiration and longing. It was as if they wanted to feel inspired again, to see love's reflection in front of them. Emma looked at Daniel. His eyes were steady, thoughtful, uncertain. I don't really know what to say, she whispered. Daniel gave a small shrug. I guess there's nothing to say. And in that silence without words, they gave their answer. No one made a big deal of it. The evening simply went on, slower, quieter. Mark and Claire sat together on the couch, and Emma and Daniel moved to the other side of the room. They didn't perform or act different. They just talked. About how they met. About their first home. About the little things that still made them laugh out at first. It felt strange knowing they were being watched, but soon the awkwardness faded. What replaced it was something unexpected comfort. Emma felt herself open up in a way she hadn't in years. She told Daniel about how she sometimes felt unseen even when they were together. Daniel listened quietly, really listened. I know, he said softly. I've felt that too. I just didn't know how to fix it. Mark and Claire stayed quiet, simply listening from across the room. It didn't feel invasive. It felt like they were witnessing something sacred to people remembering how to find each other again, as Emma spoke. She felt something break open inside her. She had carried so many unspoken words, fears, disappointments, hopes, and now they were all spilling out, gentle and honest. Daniel reached for her hand and held it tightly. When she looked at him, she saw tears in his eyes. I miss you, he said. The words were simple, but they changed everything. The room grew still. Claire wiped at her eyes, and Mark looked down, his expression full of quiet understanding. No one said anything for a long time. The air felt charged, not with discomfort, but with truth. What had started as a strange request had become something real. An emotional moment between two couples rediscovering what love meant. After a while, Claire whispered, "Thank you." Her voice trembled slightly. "For letting us see that." Mark nodded, his eyes soft. "You reminded us of something we forgot we had." Emma and Daniel didn't answer right away. They simply sat there, still holding hands, both realizing that this night had become more than anyone had expected. It wasn't about being watched anymore, it was about being seen. When they finally stood to leave, Claire hugged Emma tightly. "You don't know what you gave us tonight," she said. "Hope." Mark shook Daniel's hand and smiled. "Take care of her. And of that thing between you. It's rare." Walking home under the quiet sky, Emma and Daniel didn't speak for a while. They were both lost in thought, still carrying the echoes of what had just happened. Finally, Daniel said softly, "That was something." Emma nodded. "Yeah, I think it was exactly what we needed." And as they reached their porch, hand in hand, she realized something beautiful sometimes. When others see your love, it reminds you that it's still alive. That night, as they fell asleep, the world felt lighter. They had been watched, yes, but in the kindest way possible. And for the first time in a long while, they both felt truly seen. The morning after that unforgettable evening, Emma woke up feeling different. The sunlight streamed softly through the curtains, catching the dust in golden trails. Daniel was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, lost in thought. For a moment she watched him quietly, realizing how long it had been since she'd really looked at him. He turned, met her eyes, and smiled a small, tired smile, but real. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she whispered back. They didn't talk much during breakfast, but there was no tension between them, just a strange calm, as if both were afraid to speak too soon and break whatever fragile peace had settled between them. Emma poured coffee, Daniel read the paper. and the silence between them felt comfortable again, like it had years ago. Later that day, Claire texted. It was short, simple, "Thank you for last night. You both reminded us that love can still be real." Emma read it twice before showing Daniel. He smiled faintly. "They're good people," he said quietly. "A little different, but good." For the next few weeks, the four of them spent time together, more often dinners, short walks, movie nights. There was no awkwardness, no strange talk about what had happened that night. It was as if they all understood that something had changed, and it didn't need to be explained. That evening had peeled something open in all of them: truth, maybe, or vulnerability, and none of them wanted to lose that feeling. But under that calm friendship, there were quiet emotions each carried alone. Claire often looked at Emma with gentle warmth, as if she saw in her something she had lost in herself. Mark, usually full of jokes and easy charm, had grown more thoughtful. Watching the way Daniel and Emma interacted with quiet respect, one afternoon, while Daniel was at work, Claire stopped by Emma's house. She held a small box of pastries from Mark's cafe. "Peace offering," she said with a soft smile. They sat in the garden, sipping tea while bees buzzed among the flowers. After a long silence, Claire spoke. "You know, that night, I think it helped us too." Emma tilted her head. "How so?" Claire hesitated, then said, "Mark and I, we'd been drifting apart. We loved each other, but we stopped showing it. Watching you and Daniel seeing that spark, even through the quiet, reminded us how far we'd let ourselves drift." Emma listened quietly, touched. "You two seem so close." Claire smiled sadly. "We are now, but we weren't, not for a long time. I think sometimes people need to see love from the outside to remember how it feels from the inside." Emma thought about that long after Claire left. That evening, when Daniel came home, she told him about their conversation. He listened carefully, then said, "Maybe that's what they were trying to tell us all along. Love isn't just something you feel, it's something you have to let others see, too." From then on, Emma noticed small changes in Daniel. He came home earlier, helped with dinner, asked about her art classes. He laughed more. When she talked, he actually listened. It wasn't a grand transformation, but a quiet rebuilding brick by brick, moment by moment. One night, a few weeks later, Mark invited them all to his cafe after closing. "I want to show you something," he said. When they arrived, the lights were dimmed, candles flickering on every table. In the center of the cafe stood a small gallery wall covered with photos Claire had taken. They were pictures of hands touching, people smiling, raindrops on windows. Simple, ordinary moments filled with quiet emotion. And among them, Emma saw a photo that stopped her heart. It was of her and Daniel, taken that night at their house. She hadn't realized Claire had taken any photos, but there they were, sitting close, talking, with the rain behind them. The image captured something intimate yet pure, a look of connection, not performance. Emma turned to Claire, speechless. Claire smiled softly. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy," she said. "I just wanted to capture that feeling. Hope it reminded me of what love should look like." Mark put a hand on Claire's shoulder, pride and affection in his eyes. "We call this collection scene," he said, "because sometimes we all need to be seen to remember who we are." Daniel stood quietly beside Emma, staring at their photo. "We look happy," he said, almost in disbelief. "You are," Claire said. "You just forgot how it felt." The room fell silent for a moment. There was no need for more words. The photos spoke for them. Afterward, they all sat together, drinking coffee, talking about life, love, and how fragile both can be. Mark admitted that before meeting Emma and Daniel, he and Claire had been considering a trial separation. "But something about that night changed us," he said. "Seeing you two, seeing how you still reached for each other even when things felt distant. It reminded us that love doesn't die unless you stop fighting for it." Emma felt tears in her eyes. She hadn't realized their presence had meant that much. But hearing it made her heart swell with gratitude and guilt, because she too had almost stopped fighting too. The evening grew quiet. Daniel leaned closer to Emma, resting his hand on hers. "You know," he whispered, "I think that's why we met them. To remember how to look again." When they left the cafe that night, the streets were empty, the air cool and fresh after a light rain. They walked home in silence, hands clasped, hearts full. Something had shifted inside them for good. Over the following months, the two couples continued their friendship, but it deepened into something more profound, built on honesty and shared growth. They didn't need to talk about that night anymore. It had done its work. Each couple had found something they had lost. One evening, as summer began to fade, Emma and Daniel hosted dinner at their home. The porch glowed with string lights, the smell of roasted vegetables and lemon filled the air. Mark and Claire arrived with flowers, smiling like they had all come full circle. They ate, laughed, and talked about plans for the future, Mark expanding his cafe, Claire opening a small art studio with Emma's help, Daniel finally taking a short break from work. Everything felt light again, alive, after dinner. They sat outside watching the sunset bleed into gold and rose across the sky. The moment felt peaceful, like a quiet ending. Claire leaned back and said, "It's funny, isn't it? How a single evening can change so much." Daniel nodded. "It wasn't the night it was what it made us see." Mark smiled. "Exactly. Sometimes love just needs a witness." They all sat quietly after that, letting the night settle around them. The sound of crickets filled the pauses between breaths. When Mark and Claire finally left, Emma and Daniel stood on their porch watching their friends disappear down the street. The air smelled of lavender and rain, and the world felt still. Daniel turned to her. "We let them watch," he said softly, almost like a memory. "But maybe it was us who needed to be seen." Emma smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Maybe, but I think we all needed it." Inside, the house was warm, filled with the quiet hum of ordinary life, the clock ticking, the faint sound of wind against the windows. Yet everything felt different now. They had not only rebuilt their love, but shared it in a way that touched others. Months later, Emma visited Claire's studio, where that photo of her and Daniel still hung on the wall. Beneath it, a small card read, "Love, when seen." Heels. She stood there for a long moment, remembering everything: the rain, the quiet looks, the night they let themselves be vulnerable. That memory no longer felt strange or uncertain. It felt sacred when she returned home. Daniel was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of tea. "You went to see the gallery again?" he asked. She nodded. "It's still there." He smiled. "Good. It should be." They sat together in the fading light, hands entwined. There was no need for grand declarations or promises. They had already said everything that mattered, not with words, but with what they had lived through. The night was quiet, peaceful, and full of understanding. They had once been watched by others, but in truth, it was that moment of being seen that had saved them both, as the stars appeared above the rooftops. Emma whispered, "Funny how love works, isn't it?" Daniel smiled, eyes soft. "Yeah," he said. "Sometimes it takes someone else seeing it to remind you it's still there." And with that, they sat in silence, 2 people, once lost, now found again, holding on to the love that had never really gone anywhere at all.